The critical appreciation of a poem is something a student has to carry out right from school all the way to post graduation. Of course, the standards that are expected from students vary significantly from level to level. But if there is an English course, one can almost surely say that there will be an attempt to ask students to carry out the critical appreciation of a poem. This is something very good because the critical appreciation of a poem is a very rewarding exercise. If one does well, one gets very good marks. I call it the gold mine in the question paper. But the sad fact is that almost all students perform badly in this area. Even extremely good students perform badly in this area. The reason is that the typical student does not adopt the right methodology, does not master the appropriate technology. The aim of this class is to equip the student to face this question with confidence, to attempt this question effectively. Before I proceed any further, I would like to draw a distinction between seen poems and unseen poems. Some universities, some boards offer students seen poems. Others offer students unseen poems. Seen poems are those poems which are part of the syllabus, and thus the student can be expected to have seen the poem. Of course, only if he is a student who reads what is in the syllabus. An unseen poem is a poem which is not in the syllabus and which the student has not seen, unless, of course, he is a voracious reader. I have divided the lesson into 10 steps or 10 points. The first of these is read. The first point is read. You should read the poem carefully, with absolute concentration, trying to grasp all that you can grasp, trying to understand all that you can understand. Now read the poem a second time, this time taking down notes. You should read the poem a second time and take down notes as you read the poem. These notes are very important. These notes should form the structure of your critical appreciation, the skeleton of your critical appreciation. The second point is title. But before I talk about title, I would like to advise you to ensure that your answer has an impressive beginning. As the saying goes, well begun is half done. Your answer should have a beginning which draws the attention of the reader and impresses him. You can begin with an observation about the poem under consideration, a striking observation about the poem under consideration. Or you can begin with a general statement which is appropriate to the poem under discussion. Or you can begin with an impressive quotation. You can begin with a statement about poetry in general. It's up to you, but whatever you do, ensure that you impress your examiner. It is your responsibility to consider the title of the poem and express your opinion on it. Do you think that the title is appropriate to the poem? Is it a catchy title? Is it a title which draws the attention of the reader to the poem? Is it a title which is justifiable by the body of the poem? You must try to answer these questions. There are two kinds of titles. I'm never tired of repeating this. Titles can be emphasive. Titles can also be additive. An emphasive title does not add anything new to the body of the poem. It only stresses, it only emphasizes what is already present in the body of the poem. Sylvia Plath's Daddy, for example, has an emphasive title. An additive title, on the other hand, adds to the semantic significance of the poem created by the body of the poem. If an additive title is removed, the semantic significance of the poem suffers serious damage. Sylvia Plath's Lady Lazarus has an additive title. You should say in your answer whether the title of the poem before you is emphasive or additive. Point number 3. Traditional verse or free verse. You have to address the issue whether the poem under discussion is in traditional verse or in free verse. Traditional verse is poetry which follows regular metrical patterns. It uses the metered line. Traditional verse also uses rhyme schemes and stanzaic patterns. The fundamental features of traditional verse thus are: 1. Rhyme scheme, 2. Stanzaic pattern, 3. Metered line. On the other hand, free verse or vers libre refuses to make use of all these three things except under exceptional circumstances. Thus, in a free verse poem, you do not meet with the metered line. A free verse poem may not be divided into stanzas. It may be divided into verse paragraphs. Above all, a free verse poem refuses to accept any particular rhyme scheme. But at times, a free verse poem may use rhyme for special effects. You have to identify whether the poem in front of you is in traditional verse or in free verse. If the poem is in traditional verse, you have to discuss the various aspects of traditional verse that are found in the poem in front of you. For example, you have to identify the rhyme scheme. Into how many stanzas is your poem divided? If possible, you should identify the meter used by the poet. This is very difficult, and unless you are specially trained for it, you cannot do it. If you're not sure of the meter, don't try to specify it. On the other hand, if the poem under consideration is a free verse poem, you can discuss the various aspects of free verse that are found in your poem. For example, linear length. Does the poet prefer, in general, long lines or short lines? Is there any play in linear length? Does the poet deliberately juxtapose long lines and short lines in order to generate the desired impact? Point number 4, meaning. Now is the time to try to grasp the meaning of the poem. What is the theme of the poem? What is the poet trying to convey? Is he able to convey what he wants to convey effectively? What is the poem all about? Please don't worry about what other people think of the poem. What we want to know is what you think of the poem, and that is of paramount significance. Point number 5, speaker. Who is the speaker in the poem? Is there one speaker or is there more than one speaker in the poem? What is the identity of the speaker or the speakers? Is there anything more you can say about the speaker in the poem? Is he young or old? Is he male or female? Does the poem reveal any detail about the speaker which you can convey through your answer? Point number 6, setting. What is the locale of the poem? Where is the speaker when he is speaking the poem? What is the context in which the poem is cited? It is your responsibility to adumbrate the scenario in which the poem is located. Point number 7, language. What is the kind of language that the poet uses? What is the kind of language in which the poet has clothed the poem? Is it close to conversation? Is it conversational or is it musical? What about the diction? Is it simple and everyday? Or is the poet keen to use difficult words, strange words? Is the language of the poem suitable for the thematics of the poem? Is there a flow right from the beginning of the poem to the end of the poem? What about the poet's use of punctuation marks? Is he sparing in the use of punctuation marks? Or is he lavish in the use of punctuation marks? Do you feel that the poet's use of punctuation marks is appropriate to the overall structure of the poem? Point number 8, figures of speech. A figure of speech is a device which helps the poet to use language in a rhetorical manner. A figure of speech facilitates the non-literal use of language. You have to locate the important figures of speech used in the poem. I shall be giving a lecture on figures of speech at some point of time in the future. You have to identify the similes, the metaphors, the puns, the alliterations, the transferred epithets, so on and so forth, used by the poet. Point number 9, intertextuality. I decided to check intertextuality on Google, and Google promptly told me that I was wrong and advised me to type intersexuality instead of intertextuality. Be that as it may, intertextuality is the way in which a text is related to other texts. It is your responsibility to identify the elements of intertextuality in the poem under consideration. How is the poem in front of you related to other poems? Can you establish clear links between the poem under discussion and other texts? Point number 10, closure. How does your poem end? Does it have an unexpected ending? Is there a twist at the end of the thematic thread of the poem? Do you think that the poem under discussion has a suitable closure? You can wrap up your critical appreciation of the poem with some general statements. You can provide an overall assessment of the poem. How do you rate the poem? Do you think it's a very fine poem? Or is it just a so-so poem? What is your personal response to the poem? Do you like the poem? Or are there aspects of the poem which put you off? I would advise you to try to provide your discussion with an impressive closure. I always tell my students, well begun is half done. But even more important is the dictum, the last impression should be the best impression.